A wealthy businessman arrived at his construction site for an inspection. But the moment he saw someone there, he completely froze. What would you do if the woman who raised you, the one who paid for your education, was now carrying cement and blocks at a construction site at the age of 71? How did her life become this difficult? And where had he been all these years? Sit back, relax, and let's dive into the story. In the city of Calabar, the sun was just beginning to rise over a massive unfinished building at a busy construction site. The air was filled with the smell of cement and dust. Workers moved quickly from one place to another, carrying blocks, mixing sand, and climbing wooden ladders. Then, a luxury car slowly drove into the site and came to a stop. Everyone turned to look. The car door opened, and a tall man stepped out. He wore a neat and expensive suit. His face looked calm, but his sharp eyes carefully examined everything around the construction area. This was Mr. Dhaka, a billionaire businessman. He had returned from overseas a few months earlier and was now rebuilding his company from the ground up. The construction site and the large building belonged entirely to him. He slowly scanned the environment before turning to his personal assistant, a young woman holding a tablet beside him. "Please contact everyone I have meetings with today," Mr. Dhaka said calmly. "Let them know I'll be a little late. I want to inspect my building site personally before anything else." "Yes, sir," she replied quickly. As she began making the calls, Mr. Dhaka walked forward slowly. But after a few steps, he suddenly stopped. From a distance, he noticed an elderly woman. He watched as she bent slightly and struggled to lift a heavy pan filled with mixed cement onto her head. After managing to balance it, she slowly walked away to deliver it to the bricklayers at the site. Mr. Dhaka remained still. His eyes stayed fixed on her. There was something familiar about the woman. His heart tightened with emotion. Could it really be her? He wasn't certain, but he could not ignore the feeling. He continued watching as she carefully lowered the heavy pan of cement mixture beside the workers she was serving. A few moments later, the elderly woman began walking back. Mr. Dhaka stepped forward. As she moved closer, his heartbeat became faster. Then suddenly, his heart skipped. It was her. Mrs. Mbaku. The same woman who raised him after his mother passed away. The same woman who sacrificed everything to send him to school. The same woman he had been searching for since returning to the country. But now, she stood before him as a poor laborer carrying cement on her head. Then he called out softly, his voice filled with shock. "Mama!" The elderly woman stopped immediately and looked up. Pain filled Mr. Dhaka's chest as he stared at her tired face. "Mama," he called again, this time with a trembling voice. The woman looked closely at him. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Dhaka, my son," she said softly, her voice filled with shock and emotion. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Mr. Dhaka slowly stepped closer. "Mama, what are you doing here?" he asked with deep concern. "Why are you doing this kind of hard labor?" Mrs. Mbaku lowered her eyes quietly. "I'm working because I need to survive," she replied. Those words struck Mr. Dhaka deeply. He looked at her faded clothes once again, her exhausted face, and her weak body. This was a woman who had once stood strong and helped shape his future. Yet at 71 years old, she was still struggling to survive through manual labor. Mr. Dhaka took a deep breath. "No, this is not right," he said softly. "Please, come with me." Mrs. Mbaku looked at him with confusion in her eyes. "My son, where are we going?" she asked quietly. "To the car," Mr. Dhaka replied gently. "You shouldn't be doing this kind of work at your age." She hesitated briefly, then slowly agreed and followed him. Side by side, they walked across the dusty construction ground. Mr. Dhaka opened the car door for Mrs. Mbaku to enter first. She slowly stepped inside. He entered after her. Outside, his assistant stood in complete shock. She had never seen her boss act this emotionally before. Still confused by the situation, she quickly entered the front seat as well. Inside the car, a heavy silence filled the air. The vehicle left the construction site and entered the busy streets of Calabar. As the car moved slowly through traffic, Mrs. Mbaku stared quietly through the window. Her face looked calm, but her thoughts were far away. She was thinking about how life had brought her to this stage. There was once a time when her life was completely different. She had a home, a comfortable home. She had a husband. There was peace in the family, and even housemaids to assist with daily chores. Life was stable, but one thing was missing, a child. Years passed, but no child came. Gradually, her husband's family began to complain. At first, the comments were subtle. Later, the pressure became stronger. "When will you give us a child?" they kept asking. More years passed, yet nothing changed. Then one day, everything changed completely. Her husband's family brought another woman into the house. They claimed the woman was there to give her husband a child. Mrs. Mbaku felt deeply hurt and abandoned. Eventually, they forced her out of the house without support, without concern, and without anywhere to go. At that difficult time, she had only one person left beside her, her close friend, Daka's mother. Daka's mother welcomed her into her home. Back then, Daka was still a little boy. He had both parents, a loving father and a caring mother who worked hard to provide him with a good life. But one day, tragedy struck unexpectedly. Daka's parents went out together to celebrate their wedding anniversary. It was supposed to be a joyful occasion, but things did not end that way. They were involved in a terrible accident, and both of them lost their lives. Everything changed instantly. Soon after, family members arrived, but they did not come because of the child. They came because of the properties. They took whatever they could, the house, valuables, and everything else left behind. But when it came to caring for Daka, nobody wanted the responsibility. No one agreed to take him in. No one wanted to raise him. At that time, Daka was only 6 years old. Mrs. Mbaku watched everything happen before her eyes. Her heart became heavy as she looked at the little boy who had suddenly been left alone in the world. He was confused, helpless, and without anyone to protect him. That was the moment she made her decision. "I will take him," she said firmly. Fortunately, before her own life became difficult, she had already started a small food business with financial support from Daka's mother. She had managed to save a little money from the business, not much, but enough to rent a small room. That small room became their home. It was simple, but it was safe. From that day forward, Mrs. Mbaku became everything to Daka. She fed him, cared for him, and made sure he remained in school. She guided him through life and continued doing her best, even during hard times, simply because she wanted him to have a brighter future. Daka was a very intelligent child. He loved reading and studying. He consistently performed excellently in school and was always among the top students in his class. Years passed, and Mrs. Mbaku continued struggling to sponsor his education from primary school all the way to high school. Eventually, Daka reached his final year in high school. One evening, Mrs. Mbaku called him to sit with her. Earlier that same day, she had overheard a neighbor advising her own son to apply for an international scholarship program. She listened carefully and immediately thought about Daka. She knew he was exceptionally smart, and she also knew she could not afford to send him to university. So she decided to speak to him about it. "My son," she began softly, "I have tried my best to help you reach this point." Daka looked at her attentively as she continued. "But I am worried." He frowned slightly. "Worried about what, Mama?" he asked. Mrs. Mbaku sighed quietly before answering. "I do not have enough money to send you to the university," she admitted. "I'm sure you have seen how difficult things have been for us." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then she looked at him again. But you are very intelligent, she added. You should apply for a foreign scholarship. Daka listened carefully. A scholarship? He asked. She nodded. Yes. If you succeed, they will send you abroad to study for free. Daka became quiet. He had already been thinking deeply about their situation. Many times, he watched Mrs. Mbaku return home exhausted from work. He knew she was suffering because she was trying to support him. He wanted to help her. He wanted to change their lives. I will try, Mama, he finally said. Mrs. Mbaku looked at him seriously. You must do your best, she replied. I will, Daka answered confidently. A few days later, Daka submitted his application for the scholarship. It was a major international program designed to sponsor outstanding students abroad for free education. From that moment, Daka understood that this was his opportunity. He studied tirelessly day and night. He prepared for the exams, attended the interviews, and gave everything he had. Then finally, when the results were released, his name appeared at the very top. He had passed. He had succeeded. Mrs. Mbaku was overwhelmed with joy. Tears filled her eyes as she held his hands tightly. My son, she said softly, you have done very well. But even after the success, another problem remained. Traveling abroad was not free. The documents required money. The processing also required money. Everything involved expenses. Still, Mrs. Mbaku refused to give up. She worked even harder and spent longer hours in the market every day. But despite all her efforts, the money was still not enough. She thought deeply about the situation before making a difficult decision. Mrs. Mbaku took a loan and used her small shop as collateral. It was the only property she had left. If anything went wrong, she could lose everything. But none of that mattered to her. The only thing she cared about was Daka's future. She added the loan to the little money she had already saved and pushed herself even harder. She worked every single day and rested very little. Sometimes she returned home very late at night, exhausted from stress and work. Yet she never complained. Deep inside her heart, she carried a promise. She was not only raising a child, she was honoring the memory of her friend, Daka's mother, the woman who once gave her shelter after she had been rejected and abandoned. This was her own way of giving back. Now, as Mr. Daka drove into the state housing estate, the most expensive neighborhood in Calabar where he had bought his mansion after returning to the country, he glanced slightly toward Mrs. Mbaku. Mama, I'm sorry you had to go through all this, he said quietly. I'm truly sorry. But Mrs. Mbaku did not answer immediately. She was still staring through the window, silent and lost in thought. Mama, Mr. Daka called again gently. Mrs. Mbaku blinked quickly and turned toward him. She looked slightly startled at first. For a moment, she remained silent before looking properly at him. Her eyes became clearer now. She was no longer lost in memories of the past. She was back in the present, sitting beside the little boy she had raised, who had now become a successful man. Sorry, my son, Mrs. Mbaku said softly. I was lost in thought. Mr. Daka continued driving. Soon, the car slowed down as it entered a peaceful street lined with large, beautiful houses. The environment was quiet, clean, and organized, completely different from the noise and dust of the construction site. The vehicle finally stopped in front of a large gate. The gate opened slowly, and Mr. Daka drove inside before parking the car. He stepped out immediately and walked around to open the door for Mrs. Mbaku. Careful, Mama, he said gently while helping her out of the car. Mrs. Mbaku looked around with surprise. She had never seen a place like this before. The personal assistant, who had remained silent throughout the ride, also stepped out of the car. She continued observing everything, still trying to understand the relationship between her boss and the elderly woman. Mr. Daka turned toward her. You can go home now, he said. She looked at him respectfully. Sir, she asked. Call everyone I was supposed to meet today, he continued. Tell them I'll see them tomorrow. Yes, sir, she replied before leaving immediately. Mr. Daka turned back to Mrs. Mbaku. Come, Mama, he said warmly. He guided her into the house. The home was quiet, neat, and beautifully arranged. He carefully helped her sit on a soft chair. Please sit here, he said. Mrs. Mbaku sat down slowly while continuing to look around the house in amazement, taking in everything she saw. Mr. Daka then called for the cook. A woman quickly came out. Yes, sir, she answered. Please prepare a good meal for Mama, he instructed. Something very nice. Yes, sir, she replied before hurrying back into the kitchen. Mr. Daka sat down beside Mrs. Mbaku. His expression became serious. Mama, he began softly, I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry for everything you have gone through. Mrs. Mbaku looked at him quietly as he continued speaking. I called you many times, he said. Almost every single day. He slowly shook his head. I kept hoping one day the calls would connect. Mrs. Mbaku listened carefully. But I couldn't reach you, he continued. I didn't know who else to contact. I didn't have our old neighbor's number, and his son didn't even own a phone when I left the country. Mrs. Mbaku nodded slowly. When I returned home, Mr. Daka continued, I started searching for you immediately. I even went back to our old house, but you were no longer there. He paused briefly. I asked around, but nobody knew where you had moved to. Mrs. Mbaku took a slow breath before responding. My son, she said gently, I lost my phone. Mr. Daka frowned slightly. How? He asked. I was inside a bus on my way to the market, she explained. By the time I got down, the phone was gone. I still don't know how it happened. She sighed softly. Your number was saved inside that phone. If I had known I would lose it, I would have written it down somewhere safe. But Mama, Mr. Daka replied, you could have retrieved your number. Mrs. Mbaku looked confused. Retrieved? She asked. What do you mean? Mr. Daka took a deep breath before explaining patiently. The telecommunication company can replace your SIM card and give you the same number if you lose it. Mrs. Mbaku lowered her eyes. It was obvious she had no idea such a thing was possible. My son, she said quietly, you know I'm old. I don't really understand how these things work. Then she paused before speaking again. My son, something else happened. Mr. Daka looked at her carefully. What is it? He asked. The loan, she replied softly. Mr. Daka's expression changed immediately. What happened to it? He asked. I couldn't pay it back, she admitted quietly. Mr. Daka became silent. I tried my best, she continued, but life became harder. One day, some men came to my shop. They said they were from the loan company. Her voice became lower as she continued. They carried away my goods. I begged them, but they refused to listen. They took everything, my shop, my goods, everything I had left. Silence filled the room. Mr. Daka remained quiet. He listened carefully, but deep inside, he was struggling emotionally. I couldn't even continue paying rent, Mrs. Mbaku added. So I moved to a smaller place in a poorer area of the city. She lowered her eyes again. I started doing different jobs. Any work I could find, until I finally ended up at that construction site. Mr. Daka took a deep breath and closed his eyes briefly before opening them again. Mama, he said slowly, I'm sorry. I'm deeply sorry for everything you went through. Mrs. Mbaku looked at him calmly. It was obvious she was not blaming him. She understood it was never truly his fault. At that moment, the aroma of freshly prepared food began filling the house. Not long after, the cook returned. "Sir, the food is ready," she announced politely. Mr. Daka nodded. "Set the table," he replied. A few minutes later, the dining table was neatly arranged with food. Mr. Daka stood up and smiled gently. "Mama, let's eat," he said. He carefully helped her to her feet, and together they slowly walked toward the dining table. Mrs. Mbaku sat down quietly. She looked at the food before once again glancing around the beautiful house in disbelief. Everything around her felt new. Everything felt unfamiliar. They began eating quietly. For a few moments, silence filled the dining room except for the soft sound of cutlery against the plates. Mrs. Mbaku looked around once again before speaking slowly. "My son," she said gently, "this house is very beautiful." Mr. Daka smiled slightly. "Thank you, Mama," he replied. She looked at him thoughtfully before finally asking the question that had been on her mind. "How did you do it?" she asked. "How did you become this successful?" Mr. Daka paused for a moment and placed his spoon down carefully before looking at her. "Mama," he began, "it was not easy. When I first arrived abroad, I thought everything had already been settled. But later, I discovered that the scholarship only covered my school fees." Mrs. Mbaku frowned slightly. "What about feeding and other expenses?" she asked. "I had to handle those myself," he replied calmly. She looked surprised. "So what did you do?" she asked. "I worked," Mr. Daka answered. Students were allowed to work for a limited number of hours every week. Mrs. Mbaku slowly shook her head with emotion. "My son," she murmured softly. Mr. Daka nodded before continuing. "After graduation, I got a good job. The salary was decent, but I remembered something you always taught me." Mrs. Mbaku looked at him curiously. "What did I teach you?" she asked. He smiled lightly. "You taught me to always save money, no matter how little it is." Mrs. Mbaku smiled faintly. "Yes, I remember," she replied. Mr. Daka continued speaking. "Then one day, I got an idea. I started investing in real estate." Mrs. Mbaku listened carefully. "At first, it was very small," he explained. "But gradually, it grew bigger. Eventually, I reached the point where I could buy houses, renovate them, and sell them for profit." He paused briefly before continuing. "It became stable enough for me to depend on fully, so I resigned from my job and focused completely on the business." Mrs. Mbaku's eyes softened with pride. "My son," she said quietly, "I am proud of you." Mr. Daka looked at her warmly. "Thank you, Mama," he replied. After they finished eating, Mr. Daka stood up and called out, "Mary." A maid quickly stepped forward. "Yes, sir," she answered. Mr. Daka gently pointed toward Mrs. Mbaku. "Please take my mother to her room," he said. "Help her freshen up and get some rest." "Yes, sir," the maid replied respectfully. Mrs. Mbaku slowly stood up and looked at Mr. Daka with gratitude. "Thank you, my son," she said softly. "You deserve it, Mama," he replied. The maid then led Mrs. Mbaku to her room. Meanwhile, Mr. Daka remained seated alone at the dining table. His mind was unsettled as he continued thinking about everything she had suffered through over the years. As he sat quietly, a small plan began forming in his mind. The next day, Mr. Daka took Mrs. Mbaku shopping at the market. He bought beautiful and expensive clothes for her. Mrs. Mbaku was extremely happy. When they returned home, she looked at him emotionally. "My son, thank you," she said. But Mr. Daka shook his head gently. "No, Mama. Don't thank me," he replied. "You deserve this." Then he stepped closer and continued speaking. "You are my mother. When I had nobody after my parents passed away, you stood by me. You cared for me and sacrificed so much without ever complaining. Tears slowly filled Mrs. Mbaku's eyes. Mr. Daka continued. You gave up many things because of me. You denied yourself comfort just so I could have a better future. His voice became firmer. Mama, I saw everything. Then he looked directly at her. And from today onward, I will take care of you like my own mother. Mrs. Mbaku covered her mouth emotionally. She struggled to speak as tears rolled down her cheeks. My son, she said slowly, God will bless you. Mr. Daka gently shook his head once again. You deserve all of this, he replied. Everything. My son, Mrs. Mbaku said with emotion, you have become a good man. I am happy. All my sacrifices were not in vain. Tears filled her eyes once more. Mr. Daka stepped closer, and they embraced warmly. This is your home now, Mama, he said quietly. You will never suffer again. I promise. Tears continued streaming down Mrs. Mbaku's face as she held him tightly. From that day forward, Mrs. Mbaku no longer had to struggle for survival. She could finally rest peacefully. And for Mr. Daka, he finally found peace in knowing that he had honored the woman who once gave him everything when he had nothing. Dear viewers, never forget the people who helped you during your difficult moments. True success is reflected through gratitude and a kind heart. What do you think about this story? Please share your thoughts in the comments section. I would love to read your opinions. Also, another interesting story will be coming soon, so make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and share it with your friends. Thank you so much for watching.